Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started today. Just some housekeeping before we move into our content. Remember that these webinars are intended for educational purposes only. And while we hope that you learn new information, the trainers presenting these webinars are not attorneys. Therefore, all information provided during the presentation and the Q&A session should not be construed as legal advice. All right, well, with that out of the way, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brianna Grimes, and I would like to welcome you to the final installment in our December mini series on 2021 state law updates. If you missed any of our previous presentations for your multi state organizations, all of our webinars were recorded and they can be found on our website to view at any time under previous webinar recordings. Now, today we are going to be talking about Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, Montana, and Ohio. I am sure you will have a lot of questions, so please feel free to type the questions into the question box as we are going through the presentation. Some of your questions may not have immediate answers as these are new or expanded laws and they are subject to legal interpretation, but I'm going to do the best I can to answer any questions that you have. And I know we were having some technical difficulties with the last couple weeks with my handouts not being able to download. I have been working with GoToWebinar to try to resolve the issue, and I uploaded it a different way today, but it looks like I'm getting comments in the question box that you guys are not able to download the handout. So at the conclusion of the presentation today, I will send out an email to everyone that registered for the webinar today. I will send you guys all a copy of the PDF handout, and then you will receive a copy of the recorded webinar tomorrow afternoon via email as well. So again, I apologize for those technical difficulties. I will have to let GoToWebinar know that their alternative uploading method did not work. And so we'll see if we can get that resolved here. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump into the content today. All right, so today we're going to be talking about in Illinois, minimum wage is changing. In Michigan, minimum wage is also changing. In Missouri, we're going to be talking about minimum wage and the ban the box that passed. In Montana, we're going to be talking about minimum wage and the legalization of recreational marijuana. And in Ohio, we will also be talking about the changes to minimum wage. So a lot of changes here in these couple of states. All right, so let's start off with Illinois. We're going to go ahead and jump in with this. So beginning on July the 1st of 2021, the minimum wage in Illinois will increase to $11 per hour, and then in Chicago, it's raising to $15 per hour. Now, keep in mind this goes into effect July of 2021, not January, so you do have a couple extra months to really work towards those minimum wage increases. This is not right around the corner for those of you who are based out of Illinois. Now, something to keep in mind is that some counties and municipalities opted out for the county ordinance in Cook County, so you will need to refer to your municipality specifically if this applies to you or not. And in addition, any employers with less than 20 employees will have until 2023 to reach the $15 an hour minimum wage in Chicago. So if you have less than 20 employees, that minimum wage jump to the $15 an hour will not be expected or reinforced for you until 2023. So you do have a little bit more time on that. As far as action items go, just make sure that you are conducting wage audits anytime there is a minimum wage increase, and make sure that you are adjusting the employees that will not meet that minimum wage requirement as of the effective date. So right around June, I would recommend doing a wage audit just to make sure that you bump any employees up to that minimum wage amount that is effective in July. All right, let's go ahead and move on to Michigan. So originally, Michigan's minimum wage was going to increase January 1st of 2021. However, that seems highly unlikely given the current climate. Michigan's Improved Workforce Opportunity Wage Act of 2018 actually prohibits any scheduled minimum wage increases when the state's annual unemployment rate for the preceding calendar year is above 8.5%. And while Michigan's October unemployment rate did continue its downward trend and lowered to 5.5%, the annual average overall as of October was 10.2%. And it was very highly unlikely that it was going to dip below that 8.5% requirement by the end of the year due to the whole COVID crisis that is going on. Therefore, it is very, very unlikely that that minimum wage will take effect. So as far as action items go for any Michigan employers, there really are none at this time. Just keep an eye out and monitor this situation. I know the last I looked was on December 14th, and everything on the government website said it is estimated to hold the minimum wage at $9.65 per hour. It doesn't look like it is going to raise. They may decide to raise it in the middle of the year if unemployment does dip below that 8.5%. So you may see a mid-year minimum wage change in Michigan, maybe possibly June or July, maybe even as late as August or September. But that is something that will be announced. So just kind of keep an eye on the situation and see if they do announce any minimum wage changes mid-year next year. All right, next we're going to take a look at Missouri. So beginning on January 1st of 2021, the minimum wage in Missouri will increase to $11.75 per hour. Now, minimum wage is going to be increasing each year in Missouri going forward until the last increase in January of 2025. In 2026, they are aiming to have the minimum wage reach that $15 an hour mark that a lot of states are actually shooting for right now. This seems to be a very common trend with legislation. So the next minimum wage change specifically for Missouri is not going to happen until January of 2022. So it looks like every January the minimum wage will increase. And in 2022, it's going to jump to $12.50 an hour. So that's a 75-cent increase. So as far as action items go, just make sure that you have completed a thorough wage audit and adjusted any employees' pays as necessary for the new minimum wage increase that will take effect here in the next couple of days on January 1st. Also, another thing to do, because you know there will be a large jump into 2022, just start preparing for that payroll increase and strategizing in terms of how many employees you will need to kind of take a look at and who will need to receive that pay bump in 2022. One thing we're always recommending is that sometimes it is easier for some of our clients to slowly reach that number instead of doing one large lump sum in 2022. They may want to break it up into 6-month or quarterly intervals and do those raises slowly but surely. It really kind of depends on how you budget your payroll expenses. So just kind of keep that in mind, knowing that that minimum wage is going to increase pretty significantly over the next 5 years. All right, so next in Missouri is the Ban the Box ordinance, and this was actually enacted only in the city of St. Louis. This is also only for employers with 10 or more employees, and this will be going into effect January 1st of 2021. So if none of your employees reside or you don't have any offices, you're not hiring for any positions inside of St. Louis, then this doesn't affect you at all. So the ordinance itself actually prohibits employers from asking about criminal history on applications and on hiring forms. Employers are also barred from posting job ads that exclude applicants with a criminal history and from using any type of exclusionary language in applications or other types of hiring forms. Employers are also further prohibited from asking about or investigating an applicant's criminal background until after the applicant has been interviewed and deemed qualified for the position. So at that point, once they have been deemed qualified, an employer that chooses to inquire into criminal history must ask the applicant in the final selection pool from which the position will be filled. So it is something that you can ask about, but it has to be done towards the very end of their interview process once they have been included into the final selection pool. Employers may also not attempt to circumvent these restrictions by seeking publicly available information about the criminal history. So they're really encouraging you to not be aware of that information until this person has made it into that final grouping for your selection process. Now, there are some exceptions to this law. The first exception is any law that bans people with criminal history from being employed in a particular job. So there are certain government jobs or certain industries where the criminal history is just not permitted. Typically, it's industries where you're dealing with any type of weapon. So if you have to hold a gun, like a security guard and things like that, those may be an exception to the rule where another law does not permit a criminal history whatsoever. So you would be exempt from the Ban the Box law. Also, any other laws that requires a criminal history record check for that position. So again, this would be industry or job specific. Like I said, typically it is in some type of security where you're handling a weapon. It can be other industries, but those are the most common that we see. And if there is a criminal history record check required for either your position or your industry, again, you would be exempt from the ban the box law. Now, in addition, aggrieved individuals who feel like they were asked any questions about criminal history at the beginning or where they feel this law was violated, they are permitted to submit complaints to the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency, or CREA, which will be responsible for investigating any alleged violations. Now, if this agency finds merit to the complaint, then they shall refer the matter to the Office of the License Collector, or the OLC, to enforce that ordinance, and this includes any potential penalties to the employer. For a first violation, the OLC will issue a warning or an order requiring that the employer become compliant within 30 days of the notice. For a second violation, employers would receive an order for compliance within 30 days, as well as a possible civil penalty as determined by the OLC. They haven't really given an amount. It is going to be at the discretion of the findings of the OLC. Now, the civil penalty is typically should not exceed the maximum allowed by St. Louis codes or ordinances, but again, it is up to the OLC to decide. And for a third violation, employers could be subject to possible revocation of their business license in the city. So something they're definitely taking very seriously, but they will give you time to be compliant if for whatever reason you are found to be out of compliance. So as far as next steps go, really the most important thing for employers to do with this law, if it affects you, if you are in the St. Louis area, just make sure that you are training your hiring managers and anyone else who is in charge of interviewing any possible candidates, posting job ads, or editing and updating your job application. So that way that you can become compliant with this law, and that way you are not going to get hit with those warnings or order of compliance. All right, next we're going to be moving on to Montana. So beginning on January 1st of 2021, the minimum wage in Montana is increasing to $8.75 per hour. Now, this minimum wage change is a reflection of inflation determined by the Consumer Price Index, and it was actually not based on a ballot vote in November. So this is just a standard inflation wage adjustment. So there is no projected future wage increases or wage goals for future years in Montana at this time because this did not originate out of legislation. So as far as action items, again, just reiterating that you should always conduct a wage audit whenever the minimum wage is changing, and just make sure that you adjust your employees' pay accordingly before that January 1st effective date, just so you are in compliance with the new minimum wage of that state. Now, next, we're going to talk about the legalization of marijuana in Montana. Now, before I get started here, I just want to say that take all the information that you read on the internet with regards to this topic with a grain of salt. One thing I have noticed while researching these laws that have passed over the November election is that there hasn't really been a lot of formal legal updates from business law professionals in the state of Montana regarding the legalization of marijuana yet. And I'm not really sure why this is, but there is starting to be talks about the possibility of it being repealed by the state reps, but nothing really has been confirmed. Other states who voted and passed their legalization bills for marijuana during November election, they've already released a ton of information. You've got business attorneys and legal attorneys jumping on the interpretation of the laws and the deadlines and the due dates, but not so much in Montana. So the information I have today is really all that's available from credible sources, whether that be a valid government website or legal resources that I have contacted. So just try not to take any news articles or blogs or anything that you read as really valid without checking their sources if you do decide to do research on your own, just because there really hasn't been anything released for the state of Montana yet. They seem to be very much on the precipice of making a decision as to whether to move forward with the legalization or to possibly file a formal repeal to the state. So with that being said, this past November, the state of Montana passed something called a Constitutional Initiative 118 and an Initiative 190. So the Constitutional Initiative 118 amends the Montana Constitution to set the legal age for marijuana at 21. And then the Initiative 190 outlines a comprehensive system of legalization overseen by the Montana Department of Revenue. And specifically, it legalizes the possession, the use, and cultivation of recreational marijuana for any adults aged 21 and older. Now, the deadline for state officials to implement regulations on the usage of marijuana is October 1st of 2021. So they definitely did not hesitate to give themselves plenty of time to make decisions on the details of these initiatives. And essentially, that's typically around the time these regulatory laws will go into effect once they are finalized by legislators. So based on experience, I know that is subject to change. More than likely, that date will push out before it will push up. Very rarely do we see any type of politician or legislative official give us deadlines or regulations early. Usually, they take a lot longer than they need to. Rather than getting us anything early. So that date might push out even into 2022, especially if they are talking about repealing these initiatives. Now, I know many business owners tend to hear legalized marijuana and they may panic a little bit because there are a lot of implications to your business when it comes to recreational marijuana. However, based on the way that these initiatives were written, the enforcing of these laws are actually not going to infringe upon certain employers' rights as long as the legislation that they come up with for the regulations in October don't rewrite the original initiatives that were voted for in November. So essentially, the way the laws are written right now, as long as no changes are made, these laws do not permit driving under the influence of recreational marijuana. That is still going to be illegal, and employers can still conduct a drug testing after a work-related driving accident. So it doesn't limit your employer rights in that instance in any way. It also does not force employers to accommodate recreational marijuana use in the workplace. Now, keep in mind, you are still required by the ADA to make a reasonable accommodation where you are able to accommodate medicinal use of marijuana with proper medical documentation, but you are not required to accommodate recreational use of marijuana. So you still maintain your employer rights to control and have a drug and alcohol-free workplace. And finally, these laws do not allow for public consumption of marijuana in public places. So there will be some type of regulations that will be released with regards to probably similar to smoking in terms of where marijuana usage is allowed, if they're going to have designated smoking areas, if marijuana usage will be allowed in those smoking areas. All of those types of regulations should come out in October with the rest of their regulations. Now, as far as action items go, there are a few things that you can do right now to really prepare yourself for any questions that you have from employees. Typically, your employees are probably going to be the ones going to those blogs and news articles and BuzzFeed to get their information. They're probably not going to the state website. So first and foremost, just kind of educate yourself on, what's going on, and definitely keep a pulse on the situation. Check the government websites, look at local legal firms will always have updates on their types of blogs, and just kind of keep a pulse on what seems to be going on. Are they going to repeal it? Are they moving forward with the regulations? Has the deadline changed? What's the effective date? All these types of questions are really good things to know, especially if your employees only saw the headline, hey, marijuana is now legal, and they just kind of took that as a green light to go ahead and smoke marijuana recreationally. So just definitely something to keep on the forefront of your mind so you're educated and you can inform your employees accordingly. Also, it never hurts to take a look at your current drug and alcohol policies. It's really a good idea to just kind of take a look at those every now and then, but especially when something like this comes up in your state. If you do want to do any changes or updates that you see that needs to be made, you can always do so and kind of start in researching that at that time. I don't recommend making any too drastic of changes until these regulations are released in October, just because you don't want to make a change and then they give some type of regulation regarding the initiatives that passed and your policy now does not align with the regulations that were passed by legislation. But definitely take a look at them, see what your specific drug-related policies are, familiarize yourself with the ones in your employee handbook, because as they start releasing regulations for the state, you are going to want to make sure that you are compliant, and any language in your handbook does not restrict any of the rights of the employee that are now going to be granted to them in the state of Montana. Also keep in mind, if you are going to look at them a little bit early, make sure that there is no language currently that kind of restricts, I should say, any marijuana usage for medicinal use, because that is legal, and it is protected under the ADA. So if you have any language in there that might seem a little restrictive, I would highly, highly encourage you to amend that, because an ADA violation can get pretty ugly. It can turn into a litigation. It can cost a lot of money. So definitely make sure that none of your language is restricting anybody who has a legal medicinal use for marijuana from getting those accommodations from your company. And overall, when it comes to drugs in the workplace, this tends to be pretty serious stuff. And I don't think we've seen the last of these laws. Definitely, Montana is not the last state to be on the precipice of, do we do this? Do we wait? How does COVID affect all of this, with everything going on in the state legislation right now? So if you or your leaders in the company are in an industry where you are concerned about the regulations that could be set surrounding this new law, we highly recommend that you speak to an employment law attorney to ensure that your company is not taking on any unnecessary additional liability. And then when they do roll out those regulations, again, if you are concerned about any impedance on your employer rights, speak to an employment law attorney, and they can definitely help you figure out how to draft a policy that will help protect your company in the best way possible, given the regulations set forth by the state. All right, and finally, we're going to talk about Ohio's minimum wage change. So beginning on January 1st of 2021, the minimum wage will increase to $8.80 an hour for for regular employees, and for tipped employees, the wage will increase to $4.40 an hour. So as far as action items go, again, just kind of reiterating the same thing, we want to conduct those wage audits, and then adjust any employees as needed who are not going to meet that minimum wage as of January 1st of 2021. All right, well, that about wraps up today. It was a little bit of a shorter session today. So take a second right now. If you do have any questions, feel free to use the question box to pose those questions to me. We will try to answer them as best we can. Remember, these presentations are recorded, and you do have access to the recordings on our website at www.pantry.com. You can hover your mouse over the webinars tab at the top and click on webinar recordings. The most recent recording will almost always be on top, and they are posted within 24 hours of the live recording. All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions, but if there's any last minute questions, feel free to type them in. One thing I do want to bring up to you guys is tomorrow, if you do have questions, or excuse me, not tomorrow, next week on January the 6th, we are going to be talking about the second stimulus bill that passed. We have a very special webinar. It's going to be on Wednesday the 6th before we start back up with our Thursday webinars. But we're going to be covering everything in the second stimulus bill, what extensions have been granted. Sorry about that. What extensions have been granted to FFCRA and the tax credits and all that good information on what's coming. So we encourage you to register for that webinar and come with lots of good questions. We're going to try to give you guys loads of information. All right, well, that pretty much covers it for today, guys. Thank you so much for all of your time today. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week.